with what happened there, so you know, like how you had the problem with in Acts 15,
Yeah.
and they had to go to Jerusalem to have a council to iron things out.
Yeah.
So now, this particular problem with Nancy Pelosi, is this one of those unironable situations where because they're the boss and all the people who disagree around are just the minions, they literally can't do that anymore. So now the bosses, they just get to rule and make whatever decisions they want.
What happens is Jesus established the church in such a way that it's indestructible and cannot be influenced by the Catholic ordinary laity. The reason he did this is because it needs to be impervious to erroneous movements of thought. The only thing that can harm it is if those within that structure become corrupt. And that's what's happened. And that's the problem. But we can't therefore break into the structure and clean house. In fact, that's practically a hopeless idea anyway, because if you try to have a reformation, it all goes bad. Like if you try to have a revolution against the king, it always goes bad. In France, the Americans are worse off because they overthrew King George, I believe. And monarchs overthrown everywhere. The countries that overthrow them are in a worse position, in my view, than they would have been had they retained their monarchs.
It's true. Like over here is quite peaceful, and it's only the politicians that overthrew one king. So, but then they put the king back because they obviously knew that having the king does make a difference to the way the people.
Well, in our kingdom, it was King Charles III's predecessor by name, Charles II, who was restored to the throne, and he set about hunting down all the men who signed his father, Charles I's death warrant. And he did so successfully. Cromwell himself, the arch-villain, was dead already. But Charles got the rest. And the turmoil that England had gone through was relieved by Charles II. And, may our good new king take note, Charles II was a Catholic. Charles II kept it secret. On his deathbed he revealed it. Unlike his brother, his successor King James II, who revealed his conversion to Catholicism while an adult and paid the price for it, I might say, by traitorous dogs, but that's another story. Still, this was a great Catholic line, and I hope and pray to our God that our good King Charles III will see what his predecessor Charles II saw and comes back to the Holy Faith. And if not him, then his son, by the grace of God, to be the next king, will do so.
Because I suppose talking about that, so you know how the...
Oh, let me interrupt you and say this, that King Charles, when he was made king, and he said, Defender of the Faith, a papal title given to him, Defender of the Faith and upholder of the Protestant faith, he said, King Charles. And I would that it was so, that he would uphold the Protestant faith in England. I would accept that. To uphold the 16th century Protestant faith in these islands, it would advance British spirituality so far to do that. And then, once you uphold the Protestant faith, you've fertilised the soil for the restoration of the Catholic faith. But I interrupted you.
I was just saying, so what do the Catholics think about his little Mrs. Simpson?
The Queen Consort, my dear man.
Right.
You can't speak like that now.
Who was he talking about?
Camilla. But it's early days, so you forgive me.
Okay.
Well, he did ask. I shall answer him. And then you do yours. Basically, yes, she was married and divorced. Charles married after Diana had died, so his marriage to Diana is not relevant. But Camilla's marriage was relevant. However, he remains our liege he remains the one to whom we owe fealty, to whom we owe our subjection as subjects, because the mere fact that he is king cannot be undermined by sins he may have committed or may commit in the future, immoral lifestyle he may lead. That's not relevant. As St. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, pray for the emperor. Now, whatever Charles's faults are, they're not the faults of the emperor of Rome at the time of St. Paul. So Paul was acknowledging the emperor, against whom we are not to rebel. Charles, our king and lord, against whom we are not to rebel.
Yeah, but I suppose I could see why it would it'd be okay for him, simply because they didn't do anything to Henry VIII. So if Henry VIII could do it, then there's nothing wrong with him doing a similar thing.
It's not so much that. Obviously the faith was overthrown, so there was an effort to do something with Henry. He was forbidden from contracting the marriage with Anne Boleyn. He went against the authority of the Holy Church, and he then engaged in a religious revolution, which went further than he intended, far further than he intended. But when you leave the door ajar for Satan, he's not just going to say, "Oh, I'll peer inside." He'll ram it open and bring the hordes of demons in with him. That's as Jesus said. You clean the house of your soul, but you don't put in the faith. Then, as an empty, clean house, Satan will bring back all his demons because it's a vacuum. Well, anyway, that was Henry. Today, of course, the Protestant faith is the established faith. But I just want to say that if it were to be truly restored, I would be rejoicing in the streets in this country, because this country would advance spiritually so much from where it is today.
Actually, that's what I was going to, because I forgot about it before. You said about, so you want to bring back the Catholic rule over the church in England. That's what you're saying.
Oh, the king is to be the chief guardian of the Catholic faith. That was the way England was. That was the king's role.